Well, this looks like a friendly crowd. I've been seeing lots of faces from friends recent and friends far past, and I'm delighted to have you here. I think we're going to have a good time. We're here to talk about Doc Edgerton, his photographs, and a little bit about what we're doing today. Let me get started and learn how to use my own equipment here. And we have ASL signing today, which we advertise. I hope that's a benefit to some folks. Okay, now we've had our first equipment malfunction. All right. All right, the old manual way will work, it looks like. Try this one more time. All right. Okay, we're going to start off talking about Doc Edgerton, shown there with his notebooks as he was turning them over to the archives many years ago. Doc was known for his photographs, but here at MIT he was known for his mentorship and generosity and helping students and staff alike. And I'm going to tell a little bit about his story today. Born in 1903, Fremont, Nebraska. Same year as the Wright brothers flew. His family moved several times, including to Washington, D.C. And about 1909, he actually saw the Wright brothers fly, so it kind of dates him a little bit. The family moves back to Aurora, Nebraska in 1915, where he goes to high school. He learns photography from his uncle, who is a portrait photographer, and Doc builds a little darkroom in the family kitchen. Goes to the University of Nebraska, graduates in 1925 with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. And in the summers, while he was a student, he worked for Nebraska Power and Light. He takes a job at GE and works there for a year, and then moves on to enters grad school at MIT in 1926. And just a kind of a quick summary, he did a master's degree in a year, his PhD, his Doctor of Science by 1932, and became an assistant professor. And early students were Herb Greer and Ken Germeshausen, whom he later formed the company Edgerton, Germeshausen, and Greer with, later named DG&G. In his early work, his PhD work, and I think he had learned about some of this at GE, he started working on big electric motors. And he was studying transients in the rotor caused by sudden changes in load. He was using to visualize it a stroboscope. And stroboscopes in that day were argon and dim, red dim, and they did not quench very quickly, so you got blur. They weren't very, very crisp. So that set him to work improving on that and making his own light sources and electronic controls. About 1930, 31, he started taking pictures of things other than electric motors. And he says, when he tells the story, that the first thing he ever took a picture of that wasn't a motor was just water coming out of the faucet. And he just, in the way this was triggered, and we're going to talk a bit about triggering today, because it's key to taking high-speed photographs, is you just had, you click the shutter and there was a contact with the camera that would set off the flash. So it was synchronized to manually synchronized to the shutter in the camera. So now we're going to see a sequence of early pictures. I'm going to do it sort of time period by time period. Harvard football coach, 1934. And this is the only Doc photograph that's well known that you see where you can see the technique that he used to trigger it with. If you look right there, it's a little piece of wire. and the football pushed into the wire closed the circuit set off the flash. And then after that, you don't see hidden wires in Doc's pictures. One of the things I like about this picture, a little puff of dust coming off the football as a coach kicks it. He applies for a patent for his stroboscope, his better stroboscope, in 1933, and he doesn't get it for 16 years. He was a nobody in photography in 1932. Nobody knew of him. But within 10 years, he was one of the best well-known photographers in the United States. His first exhibition, he had 3 photographs in an exhibition in England at the Royal Photographic Society in 1933. But then what really started putting him on the map is in the period 36 to 39, he was 10 times in Life magazine, which is a common weekly in those days. And another person that gave him some mentoring, and mentoring is a theme of this talk today, was Jim Killian, who would become the president of MIT in 1949. Jim Killian graduated from the Sloan School, and his first job was being editor of Technology Review. And I knew Jim Killian, but I didn't ask him about how he met Doc. I wish I had. But he clearly took to Doc in his pictures and published 3 books of Doc photographs over the years, the earliest one occurring in the 1930s. But Doc was, competing with other photographers of the time. There were some spectacular pictures being taken in the 1930s. I'm going to show you 1 or 2. This one, how many of you recognize this picture? Look at that. I mean, this was one of the more famous pictures to come out of the photographs that were taken during the Depression. Franklin Roosevelt had I can't remember the name of the head of the Department of the Interior, but they hired photographers, including Ansel Adams, to go out and record images of the Depression. And this is a really famous one of the mother in the migrant worker camp in California. In 2015, a book came out by Time Books. It was called 100 Photographs, the Most Influential Images of All Time. And this picture's in there, but so's the milk drop. There's another picture from that time that if you were of that generation, that's a picture you never forgot. 1937, Sam Shear, the Hindenburg. So in 1937, the Museum of Modern Art in New York had their first ever photographic exposition. Lots of photos, but there were 6 Edgerton photos in that exposition. And the black and white coronet milk drop was used on the brochure for the exhibition. And then a couple of years later, the curator at MoMA did an exposition where it was a retrospective, and he chose 7 of the best photographers of the time, and Doc was one of those. But so was Ansel Adams and Bernice Abbott. So he was in some pretty good company. So now he then began taking pictures of things that would be, you might call it consulting today. I think he was going around and he was helping solve problems in factories. This is a picture of him setting up, take a picture of a milling machine. Cavitation bubbles on a marine propeller. When I took Strobe Lab from Doc, you're supposed to do a project. We still do this to this day. The students have to do a project. And one of the things I did was essentially wrote a manual on how to take pictures of cavitation bubbles on marine propellers. So I did a whole series of these many years later. This is my favorite picture from Doc's work going off to companies and doing consulting work. They were no doubt using stroboscopes and things on the big rolls of paper in a paper mill, but he always had his camera with him, and if he saw something that just looked just too good to miss, he would take the picture. And this picture is credited with Ken Germeshausen, who must have been along. But this, you can see this is not quite up to OSHA standards. The guy's barefooted. He's got cuts taped up on his leg, and just shorts on. It must have been hot. This was in a paper mill in Maine. But it's a beautiful picture. The late 30s, he's developing the equipment. He started actually with stroboscopes so that he could do the motors. But then he really started working on light sources and xenon gas and short duration single flashes so you could take pictures like of the milk drop. But then he wanted to do multi-flash photography as well. So that it comes along pretty soon. But one of his first subjects that he went out to take pictures of that he thought people would really like to see were hummingbirds. And there was a woman, Mrs. Lawrence, who lived in New Hampshire, and she had worked with her local hummingbirds for so many years that they would just come eat out of her hand. 1936. And a picture like that, nobody had ever seen a stop motion picture of a hummingbird in the 1930s until Doc did it. Notice these are all black and white, so there's no color film available quite yet. Doc had beautiful notebooks, and they're in the MIT archives. Every page, all 8,000 pages have been scanned, and they're part of the Edgerton digital collections. So you can go see them online and search stuff. Much of it is searchable. You probably can't read it, but he put the greatest notes and things. This is July 8th, 1936, and notice it's signed. He signed every page. He was already patent conscious. He was being careful. So my father and mother were here from July 3rd to today. My sister Mary Ellen and her two boys came also from Summit, New Jersey. Dad and I spent Monday, July 6th, at the Acushnet Process Company taking golf ball pictures with Mr. Young. So notebooks are full of that kind of thing. The first picture, top left, is Herb Greer, who was helping out. That's the pile of equipment that they had to take together to take up to New Hampshire to do the hummingbird pictures that day. 1938, he's got the multi-flash going. 100 precise control, exactly 100 frames a second. But he didn't get just anybody to be the subject. This is Densmore Shute, who won the PGA championship twice in the 1930s. So he'd go out and get the best-known person of the day and bring him in. Mickey Rooney and actors and skaters, lots of people. And this is from 1938, photos of golf club for American Fork and Hoe Company. I mean, they let anybody make golf clubs in those days. Frequency, 100 frames per second, exposure time set by hand and shutter for a 5x7 camera, and then his beautiful sketches of the setup. And if this is the first time you'd ever seen this picture, nobody had seen that before, the compression of the ball. Now it's 1940, and there's a note here that says, was Kodak interested? So Doc tells a story that he went to Kodak and he said, you should make strobes and sell them with cameras. And they said, well, we did a little market survey. We think we'll sell maybe 10 a year. So no, we don't think so. So Doc set about changing their minds. And the strategy he used was to put together, as portable as he could make it, they were a little big and clunky, put together strobe sets for sports photographers. And this is said to be the first shot of a sporting event that went out on AP wire photo. 1940, you know, and this is actually at Boston Garden in the old days. And those runners, if you'd shot that with a flash bulb, would have about that much motion blur. So it really made a difference. You had crisp, stop motion pictures. Well, lots of others followed. This picture was taken, it's a prize-winning photograph by Joe Costa of the New York Daily News, the 1940 Joe Louis Arturo Godoy rematch. And it's the moment Louis knocks out Godoy, captured on film with Doc strobe. 1940, he went to Hollywood and made a short film. Many of you have seen it. It's called Quicker Than a Wink, and it wins an Academy Award in 1941. It's great fun to watch. I didn't tee it up for today. I thought it might take a little too long to try to do that too. I think it's online though. There must be a way you can find Quicker Than a Wink on YouTube today. 1939, and a fellow named Major Goddard shows up at the lab and asks Doc about his strobes. You think you could make one, big enough to put in on an aircraft so we could take night photos from 1,500 feet? And Doc would say when he's telling the story, well, I got out my pencil and did a couple of calculations and said, well, it's going to weigh a couple tons, but I think we can do it. So they did it. So this is installing these big reflectors in the back of an A-20, which is twin-engine bomber that was they used for reconnaissance. And they started, the first flash ones, they were helical flash tubes. And the first one was about 20,000 watt seconds. And by the end, they worked up to about 50,000 watt seconds per flash. Charge it up in big capacitors and then boom. There's the A-20 getting ready to roll. And he sent them out to do test runs to train the pilots to use it. And he sent them to interesting places. So this is 1944 Stonehenge from 1,500 feet. But Doc did a really brilliant thing. He was on the ground. He knew when they were coming. And the way he tells the story is he put his camera on a fence post, opened the shutter, plane flies over. It's a great photograph of Stonehenge. The strobes were used, the reconnaissance photography was used for Normandy. This is a picture taken on the 15th of June. And this is it's fuzzy because it's a screenshot from a video, but it's one of those strobes with a newspaper in front. You shoot it off and the paper just bursts into flame. A lot of energy coming out of there. So the next collection. After the war, Doc receives the Medal of Freedom, and he wants to make even sharper stop motion pictures. He wants to be able to take a picture of a bullet. And so he develops the Microflash. And there's National Geographic articles and color. So the development of the Microflash is what we call the sub-microsecond flash that he made. And it's actually just an air gap spark. Very low internal resistance capacitors with making a spark in the air. And the air was good because it quenches really quickly. It doesn't, have a lasting afterglow. So this is a photograph that Doc took using the Microflash. I like this photo because the composition shows you the passage of time. And if you look here, there's the bullet. and then 3 balloons in a row. Color film, and he starts taking a lot of photographs that had been in black and white, the King of Diamonds, and then 1947, and he's asked to start a company and to help with the atmospheric weapons tests out in New Mexico. And Charlie Wyckoff, who worked at EG&G, EG&G got the contract, formed a company to do instrumentation for out at White Sands, and to make cameras that could take pictures right at the instant of ignition. The way it was done is they made a camera called the Rapatronic camera. It took one single shot camera, and they had a bank of couple hundred of them, and they fired them in sequence. So that you got basically a movie out of it, 200 frames, probably in the first 1 or 2/10 of a second of the bomb. And it had a magneto-optic shutter, which was taking advantage of polarization to open the camera to light and shut it down. And Charlie Wyckoff was the fellow who worked on it. And I think the MIT Museum has one of the Rapatronic cameras. 2. Great. We got Debbie Douglas here, who knows the collection really well. Color photograph, and the first of many National Geographic articles, 1947, showing hummingbirds. Then a fellow shows up in Doc's office named Crawford Greenwald, who was the president of DuPont. And he had a hobby of taking pictures of hummingbirds. And Doc equipped him with a portable set that he could take to South America. And he self-published a beautiful book of hummingbird photographs. They were each photograph was printed and glued into the pages. But it was a beautiful, beautiful book. Does the museum have one of those? And I think Doc had one. And it's probably somewhere in the family. Doc gets into underwater work. And as the story goes, and he was now working with National Geographic. Jacques Cousteau knows National Geographic also. Geographic gives Doc a phone call, say, hey, we got this funny Frenchman down here at the offices in New York, and he wants to find out about your underwater photography. Can we send him up? Now, at that time, Cousteau was the co-inventor of the aqualung. So there's a photograph somewhere in the collections, I'm sure Debbie could find it, of Cousteau in the alumni pool having one of Doc's cameras with the aqualung on. And they then team up, and Doc goes on many expeditions with Cousteau. And things come up in National Geographic. Doc got heavily into marine archaeology, trips to Greece. Charlie Mazel's here, where's Charlie right here, went to Greece a few times and working on marine archaeology. The Mary Rose, I'll show a couple of pictures about that, and the Monitor from the Civil War. Here's Marty Klein, and Marty's with us today. Some of the uses, Doc's use of underwater sound, I think one of the earliest uses was, how do you know when you're lowering a camera at 1,000 meters of water, when you're a meter off the bottom and you should take the picture? So you put a pinger on the camera, and it's going ping, ping, and you lower it down, and the direct sound comes up, and you see the arrival on your chart recorder. But then the sound also goes down, reflects off the bottom, and comes up, and the time delay between those two arrivals tells you how far off the bottom you are. And so that's how they got these precise positioning of cameras in those early days. Sub-bottom profiling, much more powerful sound source, and you could see layers in the sediment below the bottom. That's called the boomer. And then with Marty Klein, they got into doing side scan. And Marty developed the first commercial side scan sonar working at EG&G, Doc's company, in the, what year were you telling me if the first commercial one came out, Marty? EG&G? Okay, and then Marty then spun off and went and started his own company, Klein Side Scan Sonar. Who, do you know who else is in the picture other than you and Doc in this picture? This is side scan images from the Civil War ironclad. Doc went out with an expedition. Oh, it's rattling. Sorry. Excellent. Thanks, Tom. Get better sound quality, I think, with that. So they found the monitor. They lost the camera. Got a camera tangled up in the wreck, and had to go back much later to get it back with a submersible. The Mary Rose. So the Mary Rose was Henry VIII's flagship, and this is a painting from the day. That flagship was lost in 1545 in what's called the Battle of the Solent. The French fleet is coming in from the left. The English fleet's here, and the Mary Rose sails out of Portsmouth, gets out to about here, turns, and a gust of wind hits it, and it rolls over. It was heavily overweighted. They'd put a lot more cannon on it, said that they had like 700 people on it. And in battles in those days, you would put sharpshooters up in the tops, up in the sails. And of course, that helps to destabilize it too. So they had way too many people, way too many cannon, and it rolled over and sank. So from that painting and other hydrographic records of the day, they had a rough idea of where the Mary Rose, went down. So Doc went over and worked with marine archaeologists in Portsmouth with the side scan and found promising, humps of sand in the sediment, and then they had to go out with divers and start poking around until they found it. And they found that they did, and today there's a really nice museum in Portsmouth that has the Mary Rose with what they were able to recover at it. And what had happened when it sank, of course, it sank on its side, got buried by sand, leaving half of it exposed, and that all rotted away. So what they recovered of the Mary Rose is half of it, which makes a pretty neat exhibit because they put it in a climate-controlled room like this, and you can look out and see the insides of the shell of the ship all around you. So it's a great museum to go see. All right, color film, the Coronet in color, 1957. It's Doc's signature photograph. And again, it's one of these images that's in this 2015 Time book, the most influential images of all time. Well, I'm going to tell a little story about myself. A major message of this talk today is to remember what an important mentor Doc was to many students and people at MIT. Charlie and Marty are here, and me. So I know my story, so I'm going to tell you my story, which is really a story about Doc. So where I fit into the story, I came to MIT as a grad student, had 1 year, got a master's degree in ocean engineering, and then I went off to the Army. This is 1970, 69, 70. Came back in January of 72. And I knew of Doc, but I didn't know him. But I had taken up photography as a hobby, built my own darkroom in Nha Trang, Vietnam, on the Army base, and developed my own color film. So when I walked into Doc's office, I kind of told him this and said, I'd really like to learn how to use strobe. Can I take your undergraduate lab course? And he said, sure, we'll let anybody in. But he did. He let me in, and I had a lark. I had lots of lab courses, and I had great fun taking the course. And I was at Woods Hole the next summer because I was a grad student in the joint program. And Doc came down to give a talk, and he and I were chatting, and I found out he needed a TA for the fall, and so I signed up. So I became the TA for 1972-73 for Strobe Project Lab. And this last thing here, the Doc's letter. So I arrive in September to pick up my work, and there's a letter, handwritten letter from Doc. And he says, sorry, Kim, I can't be here right now. I'll be back next week or so. But I want you to think about doing your own project while you're the TA. And he said, I've never done color Schlieren. Why don't you give it a try? So Schlieren was used in supersonic wind tunnels. So all the how-to is in the literature in aeronautics. And I went to the library, looked it up, found several ways to do it, built my first system. With Doc's help, he knew Jack Kerbrock, who was the head of the aeronautical engineering department at the time, and Jack had a pair of mirrors. So we borrowed on a long-term loan, we still have them, 2 beautiful 10-inch telescope mirrors set up in nice Schlieren stands. And I take my first pictures. And they were 35 millimeter slides. And you take a roll of film, you don't get to run in the darkroom in 1972. You send it out and wait a week to find out if you did any good. So anyway, I have my first pictures, go into Doc's office. He always had his 10-power loop, and he'd hold it up, look at it, and he'd say, man, I don't like the color. Okay, back to the drawing board, another technique, build it, change it. A month goes by, come back, Van, looks out of focus to me. All right, January arrives, and I'm on to my 4th or 5th variation, and I read an article in Scientific American called The Amateur Scientist. Some of you might remember it from those days. Editor named C.L. Stong wrote it each issue. And a graduate student in Tennessee named Gary Settles had come up with a new way to do color Schlieren. He didn't do high speed, but he had the color down. So I built his system and took a picture something like this of a .22 caliber bullet. It's round because that's the shape of the mirrors. And walked into Doc's office and showed him one of these, and he says, Van, I think you've got it. So it took five months, but then we had it and started taking pictures of everything we could think of. I'm going to show you a series. Again, to tell you how it's done a little bit first. This is just the hot air above a candle. And if you notice, on the left side, the hot air is yellow, and on the right side is blue. So what's it mean? And if you look carefully, too, look at the wick. The top of the wick's red, and the bottom is green. So the Schlieren picture's giving you some interesting physics. It's giving you some clues. And then why's the background red and yellow? I'll try to answer a couple of these questions. So if you make a slice through that hot air and look down on that slice, this is you can see this column right, the outline of the column of warm air. Collimated light, parallel light passes through it. Light bends or refracts into increasing index of refraction. Increasing index is the same in air as increasing density and decreasing temperature. So that column of hot air is hottest in the center and cools as you go radially outward. It acts as a diverging lens. So the light passing through it is spread as it goes through the hot air. And on the right here it says dN dy. The intensity of the image in a Schlieren photograph is proportional to the gradient of the index of refraction, or basically the first derivative. So here's roughly how it works. You have 2 telescope mirrors. You have a light source. Imagine that it's a little slit, maybe a centimeter long and a couple of millimeters wide of light. It's at the focal point, hits the first mirror, forms a collimated beam. Some of the light, very tiny amount of it, goes through the hot air. That light that goes through may be deflected a little from its course. Hits the second mirror, most of the light is made into an image of that slit, and you put a knife edge in front of it. a little bit of the light, because it's been refracted, gets over the knife edge into the camera, and the camera assembles an image of what's going on. It's focused right here. So that's kind of the technology of what a Schlieren system is doing. This might be what you'd see at that knife edge. Most of the light is landing on the knife edge, and a little small percentage is getting over it and into the camera. Well, how do you do color? You have 4 knife edges, and you have 4 light sources, and they're arranged in a square like this. It's about 1 centimeter long and a couple of millimeters wide, and you have 4 knife edges which form a square hole. And now so a little bit of light is pushed to the right, green light gets in. If it's pushed up, yellow light gets in. So the color you see in these images tells you the direction in which the light was refracted. So here's your knife edges. Let's say in this, a little bit of the image is pushed up and to the right. You get a little green and a little blue, so you'd see blue-green in the photograph. So another candle, again, yellow on the left, blue on the right. The yellow light has been refracted to the left, the blue is refracted to the right, and the green in the background, where does it come from? Well, Doc liked beautiful pictures. If you took a Schlieren picture where you only just let the light that gets over the knife edge because of refraction into the picture, it looks horrible. The trouble is the mirror's got dust particles on it, fingerprints, you name it. In the background, there's all sorts of junk in the background of that image. But if you roll back the knife edge a little bit, in this case, let a little green light in, then you flood the background with green, and it covers up all the sins of the mirror. So and then you start getting really pretty pictures. And the quiz at the end is you got to figure out and tell me why the wick is red on top and green on the bottom. What's it tell you about the chemistry going on in the flame? So these are 30 caliber bullet pictures. This one's Mach 2, which you can tell by just the angle, this angle between here and here. 1 over the sine of that angle is the Mach number. So it's about 30 degrees, Mach 2. To take these were shot from a 30-06, which makes a heck of a boom when you shoot it. So Doc took all the 30 caliber pictures with me, and we'd get in early on a Saturday morning when not many people around. And if the campus police did show up, I had Doc writing air cover for me. I mean, right. I didn't want to be a grad student trying to explain why I was shooting off, high-powered, really noisy rifles in the middle of MIT. Well, we never got our party crashed, and we had a lot of fun taking pictures together. That made so much noise, and we didn't have good headgear in those days that we had the camera shutter on a long cord. We had a solenoid on the trigger and a long cord. And we would go out in the hallway. And this is up on the 4th floor, right where Strobe Valley is even to this day. Close the door. You would open the shutter on the camera and then hit the solenoid and come, boom. And you'd let close the shutter, walk back into the room, and unload the camera. So this is nice. There's some interesting physics. In the audience, can you see that little stem of light there? It's called a Mach stem. That's shock wave reflected from the density difference between cool air and warm air of that rising heat on the candle. And if you know what to look for, you see the shock wave isn't straight here. It's kind of a little wavy. Hot air, the speed of sound is different. It's higher than the rest of the room temperature air. So the shock wave's actually speeding up in here, and it gets out ahead of the rest of the room. So I'm going to show you a sequence of pictures. Doc took pictures of smoke on fans in the 30s, and the smoke is sucked into the tip vortex. And you saw that, remember that marine propeller with cavitation, that helix of bubbles coming off the tips? Well, there's a vortex there. So Doc put smoke in it and took pictures. I put hot air in it and took pictures. So this is an alcohol lamp that's just hot air. It's sucked into the tip vortex and then shed downstream as a helix. 30 caliber bullet through a piece of cardboard. And you can see the shock here, and it's just a bright, dark, high contrast line. This is called a Shattergraph. And the picture is taken by, you take an 8x10 piece of film, put it in a film holder meant for an 8x10 camera in those days, and you use graphic arts film, which is not sensitive to red, so you could have a light on in the darkroom. And you'd have a red light on, you'd set up the 8x10 within an inch or so of the bullet's path. You'd pull the slide on the 8x10, and the lights are off, shoot the gun, the shock wave from the bullet hits the microphone trips the flash, and you get the shadow of the shock waves directly onto the film. And so Shattergraphs are a second derivative of the index of refraction. So he took a picture of the black and white one, and this is the same thing done in color. This picture's interesting because the sharp edge, like for light, you know about diffraction. Sound diffracts also. That's sound diffraction occurring over that sharp edge. Reflected shock wave, wake turbulence, and supersonic chunks of cardboard. Shattergraphs of bullets and bubbles. Bubbles are really fascinating in Schlieren. Here's a Schlieren photograph of a bubble, and the bullet enters it. It takes about 5 milliseconds for the bubble to break. And the bullet will move, that's about Mach 1. It'll move about a foot or so in a millisecond. So it's in there and gone, and the bubble's still saying, what happened? And it's still mostly intact. So it has just a little hole in this entry hole here. And in this light, you might not be able to see it. There's a little arc you can see up there. And there's more down here of these arcs. That's reflected sound from the bubble. So this is where more of the mentoring comes in, and a bit more of my story. So Doc liked the pictures. He says, Kim, you're going to write a paper, and you're going to give this paper at the 11th International Congress on High-Speed Photography in London in the summer of 1973. So I write my paper and send it in, and Doc has the photo lab at EGG enlarge about a dozen of my pictures, 16 by 20, mounts them, sends them on, so when we arrive at the conference, they're already there. Doc is the father of modern high-speed photography, and when you show up at a conference with Doc Edgerton, I mean, he is the man. So I'm kind of tucked under his wing and getting to just tag along on all of this stuff. Well, they had a gallery right in front of the main lecture hall where the papers were given, and as you walk out the door, the gallery is there. And so I had a private showing of Schlieren photographs at this conference. So, and after I gave my paper, showing a lot of slides, and then I was out in the gallery, and a man comes up to me and says, yeah, I like your photographs. I'd like to use one of them. And I said, okay. So this was the editor of Nature magazine. And so my first professional article was a little tiny article in Nature magazine and the cover photo. And that's November '74. And I became an assistant professor here at MIT in July of '75. Not a bad thing to have on your, on your resume when you're worried about how am I going to get tenure at this place. So 1990s and beyond. Doc dies January 1990, and the family and the Family Foundation put together kind of a select committee made mostly of people who were from museums and children's museums around the country. And they all come to MIT to talk about, how to, what to do with Doc's memory and his photographs and his legacy. And mostly they talk about, what do we do with the pictures? And they did some wonderful things with the pictures. And I put it here as the faculty chair makes a suggestion. It just happens that I was the faculty chair at the time. Every now and then you get to be at the right time, at the right place, doing the right thing. And I was the chair of the faculty. This committee comes, and I make a suggestion to them, which I'll explain in a second. And the suggestion is that we need an Edgerton Center. So the first part, the work, Doc's photographs and all that, we did some fantastic things. The Edgerton Foundation funded several things. One was a George Eastman House in Rochester, New York, a beautiful museum of photography. That's where all of the negatives and things are, in fact, housed from Doc. They put together a traveling exhibition. First it was at Eastman House, and then it traveled all over the U.S., and was shown in museums in major cities and museums all over the country for about 10 years. The MIT archives took over all of Doc's notebooks and papers and letters, and the foundation funded them to really go in and completely catalog them. And there's a book, basically the bound book that has everything in the collection. And then working with the MIT Museum and folks around the collections themselves, every page of Doc's notebooks and all 12,000 of those pictures that he took just of people and places and things, and hundreds of his high-speed photographs and a few hours of his video and movies, those were all put in the digital collections, which you can go online and search for Cousteau and find things. And then the hardware. We have a lab full of stuff, and we work with the museum and put numbers on everything and haul it all off to the museum. In the meantime, they set up a little museum in Doc's hometown, Aurora, Nebraska, called the Edgerton Center. It's an education, mostly for the community and for students. And we had an excess of stuff. I'm looking at Debbie here. So they said, "Is there anything we could borrow?" And we said, "Well, yeah, sure." And so they show up here with a U-Haul truck, and we say, "Take your pick." And they hauled away a U-Haul truck with the stuff, and so they have their own collection that they started with their museum in Aurora. Okay, so the chairman of the faculty says it's great to do those things for the photographs, but what people revered Doc for around MIT was his generosity, his mentorship, his friendship. I said, if you really want to honor Doc, you want to do something that helps continue that kind of support for students. And I said, we should take Doc's strobe lab and turn it into a resource center for MIT students. And we'll have staff there who can be the friendly folks at the door with advice, and we make it happen. And, well, Esther Edgerton really liked the idea, Doc's widow. Paul Penfield, the head of the Department of Electrical Engineering, he's really important. He's really the co-founder of the Edgerton Center with me because it's his space, and he liked the idea. And Paul Gray was the chairman. He'd been the MIT president for 10 years. He's now the chairman of the corporation. He was a real strong supporter. So the Edgerton Center was created in 1992 to try to continue some of that Doc magic. And the opening of the center, we said what we're going to emphasize, help students with projects, do some K-12 work, and maintain the expertise in high-speed photography. That's where Charlie comes in, because when we opened the doors, Charlie was one who was there to help me. He had worked with Doc. He was my very first graduate student when I was an first-time assistant professor at MIT. And so Charlie had been off in the workplace, came back, was looking for something to do, and I needed help at the Edgerton Center. So he taught Strobe Project Lab for several years with me, and then went off and started his own company called Night Sea, and had developed underwater fluorescent photography. So that means you have to develop a light source, high voltage, discharge underwater, making UV, and he made that work. And this is Coral doing UV stimulated fluorescence. Charlie's got a beautiful website with lots of fantastic pictures. All right, so the Edgerton Center today, I'm winding down here, my throat's getting a little dry. But how's it worked out? We've been working at this for 30 years. We said, and I didn't know in those early days, how's that going to play out? Is it going to be a bunch of solo inventors or what? Well, what really mostly happened is students engineering students like contests. And there was already a solar electric vehicle team when the Edgerton Center opened. We adopted them about a couple of years later, and now today we have got about a dozen student contest teams, a rocket team, aerial teams, underwater vehicle teams, and solar electric vehicle teams. So last summer, our solar electric vehicle team won the American Solar Challenge. It's a 1,700-mile race from Independence, Missouri to Twin Falls, Idaho. It takes 4 or 5 days. These are pictures of them. The captain is Cameron, she, Kokesh, so we have a female captain, which is unusual in solar car teams. You go to contests, it's all guys. And then this year, another woman student, Lucy Young, is the captain of the team. And then last year, this is April, right, an MIT news story, a really nice story done about MIT women leaderships on our engineering teams. On the left is Summer Haas, the rocket team captain. On the right, sitting in the car, is Cheyenne Hua, who was a captain a couple of years ago. She now is a structural engineer at SpaceX. Today, literally today, we have classes going on, workshops at the Edgerton Center, all student run. Student created, student run. Here's just kind of several art ones this year. Fused glass in the upper right-hand corner there, etching glass, water glasses, making watercolor paint, making a pedal for your special effects on your guitar, rug tufting, crochet. And then we've got 100 students that come into this classroom 3 days a week for a course for credit taught by 2 grad students, both who have been Edgerton Center participants for years. And they're teaching a course on designing and making your own printed circuit boards. We do outreach programs, have since about 1996. Thousands of teachers and students come through our programs in the course of a year. Summer camps, on-campus classes, the Saturday things, an informal show up with your parents, middle school kid, bring the broken toaster, tear it apart. Ed Moriarty, one of my staff members, started this several years ago. And then we do many teacher professional development workshops. The photograph is of students with their DNA model that they have built. And we have models that are used to teach about proteins and DNA and the processes that they go through in order for your cells to be able to make proteins in your body. And the quote at the bottom was a favorite one of Doc's: the trick to education is to not let them know they are learning something until it's too late. Show them the fun first, and then the rest is history. And right now, this is our first use of a brand new lab that we've built. Another student who was helped by Doc in the 1960s, Bert Forbes, and his wife basically gave us the grant so that we could build this lab as a mezzanine above our student shop that's in the basement of Building 6C. So you see no students in here yet because we literally haven't actually opened the doors. We're dragging in equipment and getting ready to go. So that's actually the last slide. I've run a tiny bit long, but we started late. And if you've got stories or questions, happy to entertain them. And I'll hang out here as long as people want to chat. So thank you very much. It's always great to have great material. It makes it easy and a friendly audience. So thanks. Any questions? Otherwise, I'll hang out down here and we can come chat. And if you didn't grab a postcard on the way in, grab one on the way out. And a cookie.